Hello and welcome back to the channel on our continuing voyage to become better blues players. My name's Mark, and in this lesson we're going to look at playing the changes over a slow blues in the key of G. So playing the changes means changing what we play according to the chord changes. So adjusting what notes we're going to target depending upon what the underlying chord is. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to show you a kind of a very simple approach, then a slightly more complex approach. Then we're going to have an example with, I think it's about, 13 licks, which I'll then pull apart and show you one by one. There's a backing track and tab and all the usual stuff for the lesson. Okay, so if we think of a slow blues in the key of G, I'll put the chords on the screen, but we have one bar of G, or G7 in this case, one bar of C, I'm playing a C9, but any kind of C7 will work, and then two more bars of G, two more bars of C, two more bars of G, and then one bar of D, D7, one bar of C, back to G, and another D. So playing the changes means that when we're over those G chords, we're going to target certain notes that are better for G, and then when we go to the C chord, we're going to target some different notes, and then when we go to the D, we target different notes again. Right, so where we're going to start with this is if we were going to just play, if we play a 12-bar blues in the key of G, where would we normally start? Well, we're going to start with the G minor pentatonic scale. You should all know and love this, but I'll go over it very quickly. Okay, so we all know that. That's called box position 1. I'm also going to be using a bit of box position 2 in this lesson as well, which is here. Okay, and I've done lots of lessons before on how you move between the two of them and combine them and those kind of things. So we should all be familiar with that by now. So over the G chord, the simplest thing to do is when we're on a G chord, out of those notes that we just played in the G minor pentatonic, when we're on the G chord, we target the G note. When we're over the C chord, we target C notes, and when we're over the D chord, we target D notes. Okay, so where are they? Well, if I'm in the key, if I'm in that scale, my G note is here, 5th fret of D string, also 3rd fret top E, also, what's that, 8th fret, is it, of the B string. Okay, so when we're on that G7 chord, we can play licks that kind of target those as specific notes. Okay, so we might play that type of thing over the G note, over the G chord. But then when we move to the C chord, our C note is we've got one here, 3rd fret of the A string, we've got one here, which is 5th fret of the G string, and we've got one up here as well, 8th fret of the top E string. So what we might do is when we then move to the C7 chord, we might target those notes instead. And do those kind of things as well. And then when we go to the D7 chord here, well, we've got a D note right here, which is the same as the one here. We've also got one down here. So that's A at the 5th fret, A string at the 5th fret. That's B string at the 3rd fret, and G string at the 7th fret. So when we hit that D7 chord, you can kind of target those notes. By target, I basically mean we dance around them, land on them, and hold them and shake them. That's probably the most technical description you're going to get from me. But basically, yeah, we're targeting those notes. We're thinking that's the note that we want to kind of land on and make the biggest fuss about. Okay, so that's kind of like the first approach. There is a backing track. You might want to stop this video now and just go and try that. Play your just general G minor pentatonic scale, but listen out for those chord changes, and when the chord changes, just target those different notes. Target your G on the one chord, target your C when it moves to the C, and target your D note when it moves to the D. Okay, so that's kind of like the easiest way into this. And if you haven't done that already, I would really encourage you to go and just try that out. Just improvise and just see how those notes sound over those over those different chords in the progression. Okay, now that's kind of like the first introduction to this. The next level up from this is where we can introduce some other notes. So if we look at this G7 chord here, you'll notice that where we put our middle finger, which is, what's that, 4th fret of the G string, that note is not in the G minor pentatonic scale. It's not in there, it's this one here. It's the one right in the middle of these two. So if we target that note, or rather, if we think of this as adding that note to the G minor pentatonic scale, but only while we're on the G7 chord, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of really emphasize the fact that we know we're playing over that G7 chord by pulling out this particular note. Okay, so that note, it just sounds great over that G7 chord. So we think of our G minor pentatonic scale, but we add this note to it. And as you notice, you've probably seen me do there many times, what I like to do is I start with my index finger on the 3rd fret, this is G string, hammer on to that note, so I kind of come in from it from below. Okay, now we've also got it here in box position 2, so you can do those kind of things there as well. What I might do there is actually bend it to it though. That kind of gives you more of a kind of real Stevie Ray and Albert King kind of flavour. They would do that kind of lick. So you can get that note in there as well. So that note works really well over the G7 chord. So we can target our main G notes, but we can also add in that one there, 4th fret of the G string or 7th fret of the top E string. But then when we go to the C chord, we don't want to add that note anymore. We want to stop adding that one, and we want to add a different note. If you look at your C7 chord here, or where my little finger is there, 5th fret of the B string, that note is not in the pentatonic scale either. So we could add that one. And that works really well over the C. What some players do, and certainly I've heard Robin Ford teach this, and I've seen an analysis of B.B. King's playing to say he does the same thing, is that when we go to that 4 chord, what they'll basically do is replace this 6th fret of the B string with the 5th fret instead. So we're still playing a 5-note of pentatonic scale, but instead of playing this note here that we normally play, we just drop it down a fret to this one. So it looks a lot like our pentatonic scale, except we just shifted one note down. And that works really well over that C7 chord, because as I say, that note there, that 5th fret, that's in that chord. So it's going to kind of really harmonise well with that chord. There is also the same note here. What's that? 9th fret of the G string. Whereas kind of just focused on box position 1 and 2 here, I wouldn't really add that one. I would just focus on that one there. But you can also add this one here, kind of the same deal. Instead of playing this note here in our minor pentatonic, so on D string, instead of playing fret 3, we play fret 2. And it gives that kind of real kind of C7 arpeggio kind of feel. Okay, now we can do the same thing when we get to our D7 chord. There we can pull in some notes of that scale, of that chord as well. Now, actually, there's two notes here that are not in our G minor pentatonic scale. There's this one here, which is, what's that, 4th fret of the D string. And we've also got 2nd fret of the A string. So if you think of the notes of D7, those are the notes of a D7 chord. I'll be honest, I don't do that. I do it sometimes, but I don't do it that much. What I might do is when we get to, and this is what you're going to see in the example, is when I get to the D7 chord, I just stick in regular G minor pentatonic, but target that D note. But if you really want to emphasize the changes, you can kind of play those notes instead. I must admit, they kind of don't flow that well under my fingers. I do tend to just stick with the minor pentatonic, but emphasize the D. Okay, so that's kind of like two approaches. One, you just target the root note, but staying firmly within G minor pentatonic. The second approach is that we can start to augment this or add to this G minor pentatonic scale by adding in a few other notes, but we only add those other notes on those specific chords. Okay, so what you're going to hear now is, here's me playing an example. I stick just in box position 1 and 2. What I do is I add in those extra notes when those chords are playing. So over the G7 chord, I'm going to add this note. Over the C7 chord, I'm going to really add this note. But when we get to the D7, I'm just going to stay G minor pentatonic, but emphasize that D note. Okay, so here's the example. Listen out. What you should hear is those changes so that each chord kind of sounds a little unique. That's what we call playing the changes. So here's the example. So that was the example there, and what we'll do now is I will pull all those licks apart and show you them one by one, nice and slow. There is tab available for this lesson. If you'd like a free copy of the tab, I will email you a PDF of it. All you got to do is drop me an email. Next time I'm online, I'll hit reply to your email and attach the PDF. But please remember to ask for the correct tab, because I have that many different lessons. So please ask for playing the changes over a slow blues in G. Okay, there's also a backing track. That's a separate track on YouTube. Go and see that. Big thanks to the Patreon supporters who pay for the tab to be produced. I can't write tab myself. I have to have it professionally produced. So a big thank you to them. Big thank you to everybody who leaves a tip in my PayPal tip jar, because that helps also keep the channel running and paying for the backing tracks and the tab and everything else. Like lights, cameras, and whatever else is going on these days. Okay, that's the housekeeping out the way. Let's get on with the licks. We start with a 4-bar count in. A 1-bar count in of 4 beats, which is, you just hear the hi-hat going 1, 2, 3, 4. On beat 4, we come in and we play this lick here. Okay, and I'll do it nice and slow. Okay, so notice that little hammer on there. So we start with this. and then we play the hammer on. And that's how we're kind of emphasizing adding that note in. Okay, so that was lick 1. Lick 2 then goes like this. And nice and slow. I'll try and do it even slower. So again, notice we're emphasizing this note here, really kind of making a big deal of that note, which is that special note we've added to the scale. I'm making a big deal of this note, which is our C note, which is the root note of the underlying chord. Okay, so that was lick 2, that was over the C chord, then we go back to the G chord and we play this. Nice and slow. I'll try and do it even slower. Again, notice we've got that hammer on in there. You'll notice I love that little move. Okay, that was lick 2, that was over the G chord. Lick 4 is also over the G chord, that goes like this. Okay, and nice and slow. Don't think that was slower, so I'll try it again, but try and slow down. Notice that last note, actually, I barely play it. I play it very, very softly. I tried to get some dynamics in when I was improvising the solo. Okay, so nothing too fancy with that. That's just straight G minor pentatonic, but what I'm really doing is making sure I land and emphasize that G note, because that's our underlying chord. Okay, over now we get lick 5. This is over the C chord, and that goes like this. Okay, and I'll do it nice and slow. Okay, so notice we're pulling in this note here, which is not in our G minor pentatonic scale. We've also got this one in here, past that double stop. That note is not in our G minor pentatonic scale either, so you kind of get that real emphasis of sounding like we're playing a C lick as opposed to just another G minor pentatonic lick. Okay, lick 6 then comes in right at the end of that, and it goes like this. Nice and slow. Okay, lick 7 then. Lick 7 as we move to the G chord, and it goes like this. And I'll do it nice and slow. Watch out, because there's a few hammer-ons and pull-offs in this. But we start with this big bend. Notice we end with that hammer-on move again. That really emphasizes that G7 kind of sound. One more time, nice and slow. Okay, lick, where are we now? Lick 8, and this one again is going to be over the G7 chord, and it goes like this. And nice and slow. And if you visualize that G7 chord there, you'll see kind of all of those notes are just right in there. It's kind of like really emphasizing the shape of that G7 chord. Okay, lick 9, this is where we go to the D7 chord, and we're going to emphasize this note here, which is our D. We're going to do that like this. Okay, and I'll do it nice and slow. Okay, so that was over the D7 chord, emphasizing that D. Now we're going to emphasize the C chord because that's the underlying chord. And so this is lick 10, and lick 10 goes like this. Okay, nice and slow. Okay, and then we get lick 11, and lick 11's probably the easiest lick of all of these, and it simply goes like this. Okay, so we start, it's that hammer on again to the G note. Okay, so this is really emphasizing the fact that we're going from a C chord to the G chord because we're kind of giving that real G sound with that little hammer on and ending on the G chord itself. Okay, so that was lick 12. Sorry, no, that was lick 11. Lick 12 then goes like this. Okay, so this is where we're moving from a G7 chord to a D7 chord. So we're going to really emphasize landing on this D note here. And we're going to let that one hang and ring out to really emphasize that D. I'll do it nice and slow, sliding in to start with. And you want to give it a good hold and shake it at the end. Okay, then we get into, where are we? Lick 13, the last one. As we're about to start our turnaround again, our 12-bar blues again, we just simply do this lick. I think in my improvisation, it's a bend up, come back down, pull off, and then land on 5 of the D string. So up, down, pull off, and then the root note, which we hold and shake as always. Okay, so those are all of the licks. That's how to play over the changes over 12-bar blues, slow blues in G. Now I have another 2 examples because when I was putting this together, what I did was I improvised 3 different solos. And this is one of those 3 improvisations. The other 2 I'm going to put on the Patreon channel so that they contain some slightly different licks, some similar ones. There's some similar ideas in there. I just improvised it 3 times, really trying to emphasize those different notes. So there's another 2 versions of this with slightly different licks. Those are going to be available just for the Patreon supporters over on the Patreon channel with tab and all the usual stuff available, but it's over the same backing track. Okay, I hope you found this lesson useful. Big thanks to all the Patreon supporters. I'll leave you with the example solo again now, and I'm going to put all the names of the Patreon supporters on there as a way of saying thank you. So till next time, take care. I'll see you again.